Welcome! Today, on behalf of @IT ServiceNow, we're diving into a really detailed end-to-end breakdown of the ServiceNow change management process. Whether you're a change requester, an implementer, or maybe someone sitting on the change advisory board, mastering this whole process is literally what separates a stable, thriving IT environment from one that is just constantly putting out fires. So we're going to explore the official process guide today, going all the way from creation to closure, just to make sure you have the knowledge to actually apply these principles in the real world. Okay, let's dive right in.
Here is our playbook for today's explainer. We'll be quickly covering the basic framework and change types, and then we'll walk through the normal lifecycle. After that, we're going to run a practical, real-world scenario we're calling the print server scrimmage, before wrapping the whole thing up with governance and how to actually measure your success.
All right, first things first, we need to establish our framework, basically the rules of the game.
To prevent absolute IT chaos, we need rules, right? You can't just have teams pushing changes to the environment whenever the mood strikes them. The core philosophy here is pretty simple. Reduce business disruption caused by poorly planned changes. You're not just throwing updates over the wall anymore. You are documenting the risk, the impact, the implementation plan, the validation plan, and, this is absolutely crucial, the rollback plan, all in a controlled ServiceNow record. Why does this matter so much? Well, because it gives you complete auditability, and it guarantees the right stakeholders have actually reviewed the change before anything goes live.
Now, to make this work, you absolutely need strict separation of duties. Even if you're in a smaller organization where, one person might wear multiple hats, separating the requester from the implementer and the implementer from the approver is just vital for risk management. Think about it like a giant puzzle. The change requester identifies the need and brings the business justification. The change owner coordinates the entire package. Then the change manager steps in to govern the quality and enforce policy. They decide whether to authorize progression. You also have CAB members providing that really important cross-functional review, the technical implementers actually doing the hands-on work, and finally, the testers validating the outcome. It really is a true team sport.
Okay, so we know who is on the field. Let's look at the 3 different types of plays we can run: standard, normal, and emergency. Standard changes are your low-risk, repeatable plays. Think of something like a password reset workflow, because honestly, no one wants to wait for a committee to approve a simple password reset. These are streamlined because they follow a predefined, pre-authorized procedure. Normal changes, on the other hand, require the standard, rigorously assessed path. This is for things like an application enhancement or a server upgrade. These are not pre-approved. They rely on your organization's policy to generate approval workflows, which usually requires a review from the Change Advisory Board or CAB. And finally, we have emergency changes. These are your rapid response plays. They're used for major incidents or urgent security patches for actively exploited vulnerabilities, so they use an expedited approval path, often going straight to an emergency CAB.
Now, I really need to emphasize this point because it requires total IT discipline. Emergency changes are exclusively for unacceptable business, operational, or security risks. Do not use an emergency change just because someone forgot to submit a normal request on time. Seriously, if you bypass the normal governance process just for convenience, you are putting your entire service stability at risk.
So with that in mind, let's zoom in on the normal change lifecycle, because that's the one that requires the highest level of coordination. Understanding this specific lifecycle is basically your master key to ServiceNow change management. According to the official documentation, there are 7 overarching states a normal change has to progress through. It starts at new, moves to assess, then authorize, scheduled, implement, review, and finally reaches auditable closure. Let's see how this builds step by step.
Notice the critical transition here between assess and authorize. The assess phase is incredibly demanding. This is where the change owner and technical implementer get into the weeds, building out the detailed implementation sequence, creating specific change tasks, and most importantly, defining the rollback or backout steps with clear trigger conditions. You're documenting the exact outage duration and checking for conflicts like, say, payroll runs or month-end close. Once that package is fully built, it moves to authorize. And this is where the change manager and required approvers actually review that rigorous planning and give the official green light. If the plan isn't solid, it gets sent right back for rework.
It's a very similar story when looking at the handoff between implement and review. Implement is doing the actual technical work.
Starting strictly within the approved window, executing tasks, and capturing work notes. But a change isn't successful just because the implementer finished their tasks. No way. Review is the essential step where the tester or business validator proves the service actually works. Did the business outcome get achieved? During this phase, you check monitoring dashboards, review any related incidents that might have popped up, and conduct a post-implementation review, comparing the actual outcome to what was originally planned.
All right, enough theory. Let's take all these abstract rules and run a scrimmage. Let's look at a real-world scenario.
How does this actually look in practice? Well, let's imagine the scenario straight from the General Workplace Guide. The finance department is experiencing repeated printing failures right in the middle of invoice processing. Obviously, that's a huge headache. The IT desktop team investigates and determines that the print server driver is outdated and needs an update. We have to fix this without disrupting major business functions. So how do we map this to our 7 states?
Here's exactly how those technical details map to the ServiceNow states. In New, the finance manager reports the business impact. Then, during Assess, the change owner scopes out a 30-minute maintenance window for a Friday evening. They also prepare the rollback plan to restore the previous driver if things suddenly go wrong. Moving to Authorize, the CAB verifies this won't conflict with any critical financial processing. Then, during Implement, the engineer backs up the configuration, installs the new driver, and restarts the spooler. In Review, a finance power user actually prints a test invoice to validate that it worked. Finally, in Closed, the change manager documents the successful outcome, making sure to note there were no related high-priority incidents. It's the perfect way to keep the business running smoothly while IT performs essential maintenance.
Now, to keep scenarios like our finance print server running that smoothly every single time, you have to rely on strict governance.
You have to completely remove ambiguity, and this is where a RASI matrix comes in. It explicitly defines who is responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed at every single step. For example, during the review and approve activity, the CAB or approver is responsible for making the decision, the change manager is accountable for the governance of that decision, the change owner is consulted, and the requester is merely informed. By utilizing a matrix exactly like this, you ensure no tasks slip through the cracks and everyone knows exactly what their job is.
And paired with RASI, you've got your ready-to-use checklists. Using checklists at the creation, assessment, implementation, and closure phases guarantees that the necessary evidence is always documented. Think about it. Do we have a feasible rollback plan with exact trigger criteria? Have stakeholders been sent their communications before the window opens? Are all the task closure notes and validation evidence attached? Sticking to these checklists is a real game changer. It prevents disastrous business disruptions and keeps your ServiceNow records perfectly prepared for any audit.
Finally, how do we know we're actually winning? By measuring success and focusing on data-driven continuous improvement. A world-class IT team doesn't just execute changes and walk away. They measure their effectiveness to constantly improve future performance. Tracking these common reporting metrics allows the change manager to spot trends way before they become massive issues. For instance, if your change success rate starts falling, well, that's a clear indicator of weak planning, poor testing, or maybe inadequate risk review. If you see a sudden spike in emergency change volume, you might have unstable services on your hands, or perhaps teams are just trying to bypass the governed normal process, which, as we know, is a major red flag. And tracking change-related incidents shows you the true direct impact your changes are having on overall service stability. These metrics basically give you the data needed to address root causes head-on.
So I want to leave you with this final thought. Consider your own metrics right now. What does your change-related incident counter, or maybe your backout rate, say about your current IT governance? Think about how applying these highly detailed @ITN ServiceNow strategies, like implementing strict lifecycle states, enforcing separation of duties, and utilizing robust rollback plans, could completely transform your operations. When it's done right, change management isn't just a roadblock, it is the ultimate enabler of stable, continuous business innovation. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer.